know something? You're a weird kid.
Me? I'm not the one with the purple hair.
Oh, yeah. I went to a concert with some friends last night.
Really? My mom took me to see the Bee Gees a couple months ago. Who'd you see?
Twisted Sister.
Never heard of her.
It's a hymn.
Oh.
Flight of the Navigator is a 1986 American sci-fi fiction adventure film directed by Randall Kleiser, starring Joey Kramer, Paul Reubens, Cliff DeYoung, Sarah Jessica Parker, and more. Let's take a quick look.
Have we located the parents?
Yes, but Phil, look at the date. I ran it through the computer 3 times. He was declared legally dead.
You're alive.
Have I really been gone 8 years?
Where have you been all this time?
You went somewhere. How did you get there?
I can't remember.
It's transmitting in alpha waves with complex frequency patterns in them.
This could be our first contact. Any signs of life? Not outside, but we haven't been able to determine what's inside.
Something may be living, perhaps even dying inside this.
Where did this come from? From the mind of a 12-year-old boy?
I can offer you the truth.
The truth about where David's been for the last 8 years. What all this unusual brain activity means. And most of all, why he hasn't aged.
This voice keeps calling, says something over and over and over.
Well, what does it say?
He's communicating directly with the computer in binary code.
Was he doing that?
Right now, he's up there somewhere flying around inside it. Inside a spaceship.
Welcome back to the Cult of Films. I'm your host, John. In this episode, I'm talking about one of my very favorite childhood films, and that's Disney's Flight of the Navigator. I mean, this is one that actually had a decent-sized budget of $9 million, and it made 18.5. So on the Cult of Films, we usually talk about kind of smaller movies, and I mean, this is a Disney movie. This was just such an important cinematic experience for me as a young child that I just had to share my love for this movie. When I started this show or podcast, I always had Flight of the Navigator in mind that I wanted to talk about, but I was always just like, man, is it one of those films that I'm going to watch now as an adult, because I haven't seen this movie in years, and just get really disappointed at how much it doesn't hold up? But guess what? This movie does. Like, of course, it's 1986, and it's actually set back in 1978, but man, does this film hold up. Even for one as ambitious as this, as far as visual effects goes. Now knowing that Randall Kleiser, who directed some pretty big films, including Grease, they really gave him the tools as far as actors goes and effects team to really make this thing really hold up, 32 years later? And no, it's not like watching an Avengers film or a Star Wars film. For the time, it is amazing. They smartly designed the spacecraft and all that to kind of match what the technology would allow for back in the day. First off, let's kind of jump into it. This is all set back in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, back in 1978 on the 4th of July. Revolves around 12-year-old David Freeman and his family. If you had to guess that you were watching an 80s film, the film does open up on a dog frisbee show. That is one of my favorite moments of the film. That definitely took me back, wearing hypercolor and visors and all that, and short shorts. After the dog show, there's very little character development. We just know that David has a younger brother named Jeff who's about 8 years old. You have his mother and his father. The mother, played by Veronica Cartwright, you'll know her from Alien, who does a fantastic job. Now that I'm older and watching this through jaded, old man eyes, just getting to love this film even more, knowing that awesome actors like Veronica Cartwright and Cliff DeYoung just seeing them again in this film really also made me appreciate it on a kind of a different level. So it's 4th of July. They all want to go out on their boat. They live in Florida. David's little brother Jeff goes off to go play at his friend's house, and David is charged with going to go make sure his little brother like has to walk through the woods or whatever. And that was kind of funny because you could definitely see how the movie dates itself. It's back in 1978 where things are a lot more safe back in the day. You know, now you can't walk your dog without looking over your shoulder, but they let their 8-year-old son like kind of walk through the Florida swamps home. They do send David after him. Jeff jumps out of a tree. He scares David. David falls down this little ravine, and that's kind of where the movie kind of starts. So, because this film kind of takes a while to really unravel itself. You know, it kind of has that Twilight Zone-esque vibe to it. When David goes home, it's this odd older couple that's in his house. He starts kind of tripping out, wondering where his family is. He goes down to the police station. Police station brings him to his family now, and as it unfolds, he realizes that he's actually been a missing person case for 8 years. You know, it's now 1986. The cops are kind of asking him, you know, what year it is and who the president is. It was just funny to be like, oh, 1978, Jimmy Carter. Which I wasn't even alive for that. He notices his mother and father have aged quite a bit, but the real kicker comes when he sees Jeff, you know, now 8 years later, Jeff being like 16 years old, and Jeff's kind of freaking out too. He's like, you should be 20 years old now. You're my little big brother. You know, that's when it kind of starts setting in that this, you know, something really happened. They basically pronounced David dead because he was missing for 8 years. When Dr. Louis Faraday kind of enters stage left, played by Howard Hessman, he is kind of a front man for NASA because on an aside, you see them find this spaceship. Super silver, very reflective, very smooth, very aerodynamic, and they're even like, you know, it just kind of, they find this in a field unrelated to David's case at first, and they're just like, well, how are we going to take this back to NASA? And they wind up like pushing it, and it's just like completely weightless because it's floating on the ground. So they scoop that up, and then they scoop up David. They find out about these two like major anomalies. This kid that's been missing for 8 years has now been found and hasn't aged a day, and this spaceship that just kind of popped in out of nowhere, kind of crash landed. I think it got caught on like power wires. So it kind of short-circuited things that we'll find out later. Take him to this like secret base in NASA, which kind of looks like Lockheed Air Base. It's funny because I know it's supposed to take place in Florida, but it definitely looks like, I used to live in like Palmdale area in California. It does look kind of like Lockheed Air Force Base where they take him, but they kind of set him up to whatever they think like a 12-year-old boy would like. They give him a bunch of like spaceships. It's almost like that scene from Big where, you know, he just has all these toys in his room, and all he wants to do is watch Starsky and Hutch. And then that's when we get introduced to Sarah Jessica Parker, who is kind of, you know, his waitress, who has this R2-D2-esque robot, this kind of valet system. So she's charged with taking care of David's needs, whether that be food or whatever, and she's very hip. She's got, you know, the purple hair going on because she just came back from a Twisted Sister concert. He's seeing music videos for the first time, like fish out of water, because he is in a different timeline now. Throughout his stay at the base, he's starting to hear voices of, you know, kind of like distressed voices of you know, help me and come to me and all this stuff, and only he's able to hear this. So they do a little bit of those, you know, the science scenes where he's kind of strapped in, and they're asking David questions, Dr. Faraday is, about where he's been and what's going on, and of course David doesn't know. He's just like, why would I know that? And I have to say, you know, Joey Kramer, I know he's had quite a bit of problems in his adult life with, you know, drug trafficking and all that, but you know, maybe that's the one thing that doesn't hold up is his performance now, you know, 32 years later. Or when I watched it as a kid, I probably excused it because I was probably annoying, but watching, he's the only part of the movie, watching it now as a grizzled old adult, where I'm just like, oh god, it's like sometimes his delivery and stuff is like nails on a chalkboard. But they're asking him all these questions of where he's been, what happened, and he doesn't know what's going on, but it's all just kind of coming out on the screen from his brain until it like kind of word vomits in alien language about where he's been, and they surmise that he's been traveling through like light speed and whatnot, and they kind of pick it up pretty fast too. That's what I liked about this. It wasn't a lot of it's not a ton of exposition. They do it in a way, in like a conversational way, which kind of works for me, because once you're dealing with a lot of, you know, time travel and space, it can get pretty heady, and these type of films tend to bog down with a lot of exposition and trying to explain, and things kind of fall apart that way. You know, Faraday's, he just kind of has been with NASA for a while. He's just like, yeah, he's seen some shit. He's obviously seen the spaceship and now this kid. And, you know, he's just like, yeah, you were traveling through light speed, and that's why we all aged, and you only were gone for what seemed to you about 4 hours. I mean, I guess if there was a villain to Flight of the Navigator, I guess he would be it. Because, you know, literally he's just doing his job. He's a scientist, and he just found the two biggest marvels of, you know, in human history. It's almost like he's upset with it because, you know, he doesn't have a choice. He has to kind of turn David and this spaceship, this anomaly, lifetime like science projects, kind of like a whole ET thing. But David escapes through Ralph. He gets to the spaceship. He's following the voices there, but with the aid of Sarah Jessica Parker. Once he arrives, you know, that's when the spaceship opens to him, and he walks up. A really cool design. Again, 1986, and the graphics look this good is really saying something. Like, they really knocked it out of the park with the effects. And even the set, like the set of the actual spacecraft inside, everything is super monochrome, everything's super chromed out, but it has so many intricate like details on it. There's so many different lines and divots. These things are just incredible, the amount of detail that probably went into this set, because it could look, you know, if they didn't spend a lot of time doing it and putting this much attention to detail, it could have just looked like a big silver mess, and it would have looked really uninteresting. But just with the amount of different lights and designs, they really did a great job. It almost looks like hieroglyphics. Like, it looks like almost like a futuristic pyramid ship, and it does kind of take on that shape sometimes, but in the inside it looks like the etchings are kind of hieroglyphic-y. I'm making up words right here on the Cult of Films. And that's when we get our introduction to Max. Is played by Paul Reubens. That's right, the one and only Pee-wee Herman. He actually was credited with the pen name Paul Mall. I guess he was a big unfiltered cigarette smoker back in the day. But yeah, this was a 1986. Paul Reubens, Pee-wee was, you know, on fire at this point. This is pre-Scandal and all that stuff. So, you know, this was an awesome role from him, and this is perfect Paul Reubens. Like, he's doing a really he does a really great like straight voice for kind of like the first portion of when Max is involved. Max is the AI computer. Like, if you ever seen WALL-E and you see the ship's I guess main comm, which turns out to be the villain, I'm sure it was kind of inspired by Max, because Max is just such a cool design. And again, this is more practical effects, because although he is he's just this kind of like arm with like this robot eye, the movement on it is very intricate and very detailed. How he whips around, gets right up into David's face, and his colored eye, it changes really cool. Like, it looks almost like a crystal ball, a neon crystal ball or something. It looks like it was all done practically. The fact that Paul Reubens can really give something like this, which looks like an articulate, like, mechanical arm with a lens, that much life and that much humanity, really says something. Like, Paul Reubens just was, you know, he stole the show. Every time that Max was on screen, whether he was playing it straight or making jokes and all that, he was just the best part of the movie, of course. And you have to give some credit where credit's due to Joey Kramer, having this chemistry with something so robotic looking. You know, it's one thing to be in like a Muppet movie or something where Muppets could be very expressive even though they're just kind of doing this, but where you have to kind of pretend that this like robotic chrome arm with a glass eyeball, that you're conveying so much emotion that you're angry at it, or you're laughing with it, or you're sad when you have to part ways. You know, I will give Joey Kramer some credit there. Max explains that he is just kind of a cosmic collector that's from Phalon, and he's gone across the galaxy, collecting specimens. So he has this whole like menagerie of little alien creatures, some little, some big. Like you see this one, like this giant screaming eyeball, which is kind of terrifying. So you can only imagine, like, that's the only part of it you see is this giant eyeball. I don't know where the rest of it fits, but it does. You get the little guy that David winds up keeping for himself because his this little alien's planet got wiped out by a meteor, so, you know, he was orphaned, so that's very cute. It's just like a little tiny miniature Salacious Crumb thing that just laughs at David's jokes. And this is where I was stating earlier, where I was surprised with my younger self that I was really able to let this movie breathe, because we don't see this interaction with the introduction with Max, and Max is definitely, like I said, the most entertaining part of the film, and that's where it gets very exciting. That's where they're flying around in outer space and across the US and all this stuff, where you get to see a lot of the cool shots of the spacecraft when these different modes. The movie kind of takes a while. It does that whole, like I said, Twilight Zone-esque thing where this fish out of water. So I'm surprised that myself, you know, had the patience for it, but also surprised that Disney itself, and especially director Randall Kleiser, respected his child audience to kind of stay focused until like the big flashy stuff happened, and I really appreciate that. Max explains, put all the information of the Navigator into David's head, but the human brain is very inferior, so all the information is leaked out. So, you know, that's why, and then he short-circuited when he kind of crash-landed on the power strip. So now that, you know, 8 years later, that's why he wasn't able to put David back to the exact time that he took him, because he said even the other animals, once he's done in putting everyone back, they're kind of meant to travel back in time where they could withstand it, their species, where he's not sure that David can. The main point of the movie is just for Max to scan David's brain and get all the information back, and he's just like, yeah, that's it. He just like scans him. He's like, yeah, that's it. Now you can go home. Remainder of the runtime is just David trying to get back to Florida, but it's kind of funny because neither, you know, they could chart a map, you know, across, you know, light speed and space time. Can't figure out where David's house is because he moved. It's just David and Max kind of pit stopping across the U.S. to try to find Fort Lauderdale, which is kind of funny. Once he gets there, he realizes that this is not his time. You know, this is 8 years later, and he realizes that, you know, Faraday and the rest of NASA and the rest of the world aren't just going to let David and Max be, or at least, you know, Max could just kind of peace out and go back to where he needed to be in the time that he needed to be, but David realizes that he's going to be a test subject for the rest of his life. So he kind of turns his back, you know, sadly on his parents and his family. He jumps back into the craft and basically just says, yeah, I'm ready to try to either sacrifice myself if this doesn't work out and I get vaporized from going back in time, or, you know, it's going to work out. So he basically, like, resigns to the fact that he might die, but he just doesn't want to stay in that time with that situation. So, of course, you know, being a Disney movie, it does work out. It works out just fine. He goes back. His character arc, he finds a new appreciation for his family, even his little shitty brother Jeff, and the little Salacious Crumb thing that he winds up taking with him. It's definitely a family film, even though there is some kind of more adult language. It's fun seeing Sarah Jessica Parker in 1986 again. And it's just, this is just a fantastic film, and I couldn't believe that it held up. I almost was watching it through my fingers, because I just didn't, this was just such an important movie to me growing up, and kind of shaped me becoming such a film fan throughout the years, that I just didn't want to watch it again because I didn't want to screw up the memory of it. But I was so pleasantly surprised that not only the heart and most of the acting held up, but also the effects were just adorable. I mean, it wasn't anything like, I mean, it was definitely something groundbreaking for the time, but, you know, they kind of played it safe with the design of the craft and all the special effects, and just did a really great job with the creature puppets and all that. I mean, okay, some of them kind of looked thrift store Muppety, some of the creatures in there, but I'll give it a pass. You know, there's one just complete, like, piece of slime that's, like, coughing and sneezing, and He's like, oh, what's wrong with this one? He's like, oh, he's got a cold. If you're a young child and watching my channel, get your parents' permission first. But go watch Flight of the Navigator. If you're my age or even in your 20s and you just like film and you just like that kind of sci-fi kind of adventure, this is just such an uplifting film. And it still holds up 32 years later, and I couldn't be more pleased. So thank you once again for joining me on another episode of Cult of Films. If you like this, do all the YouTube stuff, click, subscribe, thumbs up the video, share it on Twitter, share it on all the social medias. I would very much appreciate that. Also, if you want to listen to this in podcast form only, you can do that on Spotify, iTunes, leave ratings on there as well. Until next time, go watch more cult films. Compliance.